Welcome, my name is Luke Mortensen, and I'd like to introduce you to Team Beijing. They'll all be speaking to you very, very soon, so we're going to jump straight into our presentation. The title of the presentation is Enabling the Sea of Connectivity and Sharing the Rewards. As we move from 5 billion devices to 50 billion devices, the name of the game and the central point in our presentation is how Ericsson is going to capture a larger share of the rewards. Christopher Columbus once said, "Following the light of the sun, we are left the old world behind." In our presentation, we're going to propose two solutions where hopefully Ericsson will leave the old world behind. Now, we like to begin with the end in mind, so we're going to begin by telling you what those solutions are, and then we're going to work backwards to go on to explain how it is that we got to that conclusion. Now, the first thing that we're going to propose is that Ericsson starts selling machine-to-machine device management platforms to network operators. Now, that sentence is a little bit of a mouthful, so I understand. Take a second on that. But the purpose of this slide, or rather the purpose of that point, is that we want to help and accelerate through these platforms customer acquisition for network operators. Now, the method by which we go about doing that is using these platforms to make it very, very easy for the machine-to-machine based businesses to compete. So allowing that, we will hopefully add more and contribute more to this very wirelessly networked world. The second argument that we're going to be making is that we recommend that Ericsson embrace, invest in, and help diffuse Multihop Technology. Now, Multihop Technology, we'll go into the details of that later, but the main thing about this is trying to solve the congestion problem. Now, Ericsson, in a sense, is in part a little bit of a contributor to the congestion problem. They've sold a lot of equipment that have enabled a tremendous number of devices to become connected. And as a result, we now have essentially a market opportunity created by that congestion. And as a result of that market opportunity, Ericsson is in a unique position to be able to capitalize on that. So with that in mind, we're going to turn it over to Samit, who's going to talk more about the sea of connectivity.
Ericsson is championing a vision. And this vision is of a world which in 10 years is going to go from 5 billion connected things right now to 50 billion connected things. Now let's try and visualize what this world looks like or will look like. Say you're in Phoenix, Arizona, or New Delhi, India, and you're driving back home from work on a very hot summer day. And your car can capture traffic-sensitive data. And when it senses that you're 20 minutes away from your house, it sends a signal directly to your house, which in turn turns on your air conditioning system, so when you reach, the temperature is ambient. Now, this is a wonderful solution, but this is also a very small and simple example of the millions and millions and millions of application possibilities that this sea of connectivity, this ecosystem, brings to the table. So what sort of an approach should Ericsson take about this? What sort of an attitude should we have? Well, we can always take a step back. We become more passive, we let things happen, and we develop a strategy around whatever has happened. Or we could go on the offensive, we could be aggressive. We could actually work towards enabling and supporting this evolution. We suggest, or we believe, that Ericsson is in a great position to ensure that this prophecy of 50 billion connected things in 2020 becomes a reality. The current situation in the wireless industry and some of its implications, for Ericsson are as follows. They all believe, they are all very bullish about the growth of the mobile traffic that is expected over the next few years. Ericsson, as you see, is only capturing a piece of that pie. Now, we think that's a problem. We're leaving a lot of money out on the table for competitors and for new entrants to come and steal our lunch. The other thing that's going to be a consequence of this 50 billion connected device sea of connectivity is obviously network congestion. And this is going to be a problem for the network operators. And they're going to turn to us because we partner with them in 175 countries. We provide answers to these questions. And that is why we think Ericsson is in this unique position to benefit not only from the outcome of having 50 billion connected devices, but also from the evolution that's going to take it from 5 to 50 in 10 years. We're always going to make money. Even if we did nothing, the fact that the network's going to grow and the fact that we sell equipment that supports that network means that we're going to sell our equipment and make money. What we are suggesting, or what we are saying, is that there is room for more. This huge mesh of interconnected devices is going to require control systems. It's going to require software applications. Well, Ericsson has the capability. We could provide those software applications or those platforms to our customers, which brings me to the first part of my recommendation, which is a software solution, essentially a machine-to-machine device management platform that we can sell to our customers. The other aspect, as we've alluded to it, is the data traffic problem. Well, sooner or later, the network operators are going to figure out that there's huge congestion. They're going to come to us. Why don't we preempt this? Why don't we already invest in a technology that's going to provide a solution to this problem? And that's the second part of our recommendation. Embrace a new technology, the Multihop technology that provides this solution, and both these features will help Ericsson drive higher revenue. It'll grow the pie, and we get a larger share of the pie. Tom's going to now go into the details of the device management platform, and towards the end, Luke's going to describe what the Multihop technology piece is all about.
Thank you, Sumit. Sumit, you're absolutely correct. The control is of critical importance as we look to a new world that has 50 billion connected devices. If I went to a network operator and said, this is a great opportunity for you, I think they would sense first the opportunity, but then a great sense of fear. Wait a minute, I'm going to have billions of new connected devices on my network. How do I handle that? I don't have any sort of facility to handle that. The analogy that I like to use is that we're taking a bunch of people, putting them into rowboats, sending them out into a rough sea with no sort of navigational aids. Some of these are going to get lost, some of them are going to sink, some of them are going to get in the way of the existing traffic, the maritime shipping lanes. And this is indeed a problem. As a trusted advisor to these network operators, we are in a perfect position to help them navigate in this sea. So not only giving them the connected devices, but also giving them a platform to manage it in two ways. One, to enable the rapid deployment of these, things like provisioning and activation of devices. And two, the management, things like collecting status, tamper warnings, or low battery alerts, to upload new firmware to the devices, and just to keep track of them. What's out there, what's working, what's not working, what needs to be replaced. We envision this as a machine-to-machine platform. We would sell this using a software-as-a-service model to our network operators. They would in turn sell it along with the bandwidth needed to utilize it to their customers, which would be new machine-to-machine businesses. And then either directly or indirectly through our network operator partners, we would provide the connection modules that would enable devices to connect to the network, and also consulting around best practices or standards, or certifying these devices for our network operator partners to say that, yes, these are safe for your network environment. An example of a machine-to-machine business is, say, in the healthcare industry, connected heart monitors or diabetic sugar monitors, and we have a particular example that we'll discuss in a moment. Another would be a new entrepreneurial venture that wants to set up traffic monitoring sensors. As Sumit alluded to earlier, that data could be sold in aggregate then to news outlets or to things like the Ford Sync system in their cars. Ericsson, because it's partnering with 175 different operators around the world, is in a unique position then to contribute best practices back to the industry through industry associations like the GSMA. And we envision this now as the new ecosystem for realizing the connected devices. I really want to point out here that there is a big opportunity being missed by Ericsson, because Ericsson currently has a module offering that they can provide to network operators, except they're sort of giving them this network module and giving them no way to manage these devices. And that is a huge opportunity, because a couple of competitors, or small competitors, are now coming in, and it's a big opportunity for you to really capitalize on this, this new ecosystem. Along with this, we propose to the network operators a new pricing structure that has two pieces. One, there'll be a flat rate fee that we will charge to the operators to provide this, or that the operators, will charge to their customers to use this management application, and we'll collect a portion of that revenue. At the same time, they will be charged for the bandwidth they utilize in two ways. Of course, they'll pay for the aggregate bandwidth that they use, except we want to also use a form of price discrimination by also incorporating frequency, because we think frequency is a good proxy for the criticality of a network device. So a simple heat sensor that collects data, uses a certain amount of bandwidth, may pay a certain rate for this utilization. Something that's mission critical, perhaps collects the same amount of data, would be charged a higher rate, because it's mission critical that this data get back to its servers, and it communicates much more frequently. The results in terms of financial impact for Ericsson and our network operator partners We're assuming that, except for in 2009 during the recession year, in recent years we've seen a 10% CAGR on our revenue growth. We expect a 4% boost on that because of the adoption of this strategy. In absolute terms, that takes our revenue figure from $31 billion today in 2010 to $62 billion in 2015, and that will be realized both through the production and sale of these modules that I discussed, and also the tower infrastructure that goes along with that, and the revenue that we collect from the M2M platform that I also discussed. Taking a typical partner over the same period, they would experience at least a $15 billion incremental revenue boost, and this will then be a great success for us. I've painted this solution in terms of broad strokes. I would like to turn it over to Ashin, who will discuss this in more detail in a particular example.
Thanks, Tom. So we're going to have 50 billion devices on this network. Should we jump in directly? We warn you against doing that. There's a lot of unknowns with this technology. We're talking about this M2M device management platform. So based on that, we want to recommend jumping into a small niche market in the beginning, iron out the kinks, and move on from there. So the market we picked was the senior citizen healthcare monitoring market. This is a quick clip of how many senior citizens, people over the age of 65, reside in emerging and developed countries around the world. As you can see, this is a pretty big pie for a prototype market. And because we want to start off in a more mature market with a lot of solid infrastructure, we recommend starting off in the US market with a network operator like Verizon. Verizon also has an incentive to join us because, as Tom mentioned, AT&T has already started some of this stuff with Jasper, as you might know. So with this $39.5 million person market in senior citizen healthcare, we further want to narrow it down to a dense and uniform market where you can target devices to immediate needs. The market we recommend is the nursing home market. There's 1.8 million nursing homes in the US with an 83% average occupancy rate. And unfortunately, with the way the health is in the US, about 73% of people in here suffer from heart disease and 23% suffer from diabetes. This right there gives us a 1.4 million person market as our prototype market. Now, when you're talking 50 billion devices, this is a small number. We agree with that, but it's a good way to get your foot in the door, iron out the kinks before you roll out your platform for more use. And just 3 quick points I wanted to make about why we chose the US market. US is a very entrepreneurial culture, and we believe that the small businesses would like to jump onto this opportunity to develop a new technology. Secondly, with the rising healthcare costs in this country, there's a fight to create lower cost devices that prevent you from going to the doctor as often as you might otherwise. Thirdly, we feel that institutions in the US for nursing homes are well established, but they're extremely competitive. They're fighting with each other to get the best technology in their institutions so that they can change that 83% occupancy rate closer to 100% occupancy rate. And because of that, we think we can partner with some of these institutions, use their networks to find entrepreneurs who might be interested in creating these devices and moving on from there. So with this, we see, of course, there's going to be 50 billion devices in 10 years. But what is that going to do to congestion on our existing networks? Can we just throw more hardware at it? We don't think so. And to talk about that, I'd like to call Luke.
The second solution that we're going to propose today is about Multihop Technology. Now, Multihop Technology is not well known to all of the people in the room, so I'm going to do a brief primer just to kind of cover some of the basics. In the typical situation in the status quo, if this was a tower, and by the way, this is in Malaysia, if there was a tower with a cell tower and it happened to be at a high location, ideal location for a tower like this, and all of the dots represented different devices, this represents a typical scenario. Each of these devices will connect directly to each and every one of these towers, or every one of the towers will connect to each of these devices. Now, ordinarily, that's not a problem unless you're getting into a situation where a lot of these users are pulling a lot of data, or there are just simply a lot of connections going on at the same time. This particular user is not getting connected or just got dropped from a call. The result is because of the amount of congestion that's going on in the area. Now, this doesn't always happen, but as we move from 5 billion devices to 50 billion devices, we can expect that this is a problem that would increase, regardless of whether we move to 4G or otherwise. There's a limited amount of spectrum, and certainly as we increase both the congestion of the number of devices and the throughput per device, we're going to have a bit of a problem. Now, the solution to this is Multihop Technology. And the method that this works is it reduces the number of connections directly to the tower and uses a variety of optimization tools. Now, first of all, the most important thing here is those that are going to have a direct line of sight to the tower at a reasonable distance from the tower are going to be the ones that are likely to be the most direct connection. They're able to communicate with the least loss of packets. They're able to literally communicate in a more efficient way. They're able to communicate with using less power. Versus somebody who's behind a plate of steel or at a greater distance, they're going to have to use more power to get it to the tower. On the other hand, if this guy's in front of a plate of steel but going around a corner, he can connect to somebody who's in a direct line of sight to the tower, and he's watching a video, he can connect to another person who's only using say a 1 kilobyte voice connection and is able to take advantage of the fact that that person has say a 100 kilobyte uplink to that tower. Now, that's just an example of what's going on here. The reason why it matters is not in a simple situation like this, it's when you get a situation like this. And multiply that by about 1,000 when we're talking about a dense place like Kuala Lumpur or New York and so on and so forth. This is a big problem, and it's going to get bigger as we move from 5 billion devices to 50 billion devices, and the throughput per user starts going through the roof. Big problem. So kind of the second thing to point out about this, and a second big advantage, is the opportunity to do a different form of pricing. Now, we can't fix the pricing problem completely, but we can improve the pricing through the use of a multi-hop situation. Now, if we're talking about an iPhone in the United States with a single flat rate data plan, where some users are using a tremendous amount of data and affecting other users, that's kind of a big problem, particularly if they're not using multi-hop. In the case of this, if you have non-users of multi-hop being charged a slight premium because they're a lot more expensive and less efficient use of bandwidth, then you're going to do several things. First of all, these users are going to be less optimum, so they're going to pay a little bit closer to their cost. It's not perfect usage pricing, but it's better than what we have now. The second thing that you have is these other users, people are going to be attracted to become part of the user community here because, one, they're going to pay a lower price, and two, they're going to get better bandwidth. So it's a pretty compelling reason for people to get on the bandwagon and buy handsets that are capable of doing something like this. So this is just one other argument. Now, why should Ericsson care about multi-hop to begin with? Well, there's four main arguments here. We're not going to talk about all of them in tremendous detail, but the first one is there's the opportunity to sell handset communication chips, depending on whether or not Ericsson, through either licenses or otherwise, or internal development, is able to be first to market in this area. Now, alternatively, even if they're not, there's still an opportunity to sell tower upgrades that are able to better optimize for multi-hop, as well as hardware sales as time goes on for replacements that include this, particularly in congested areas. Third area is about market share. When you talk about winning contracts in dense city areas, you'd have a better chance of winning those contracts if you have this kind of technology under your belt. Moreover, if we go down to the technology and software, you have potentially an opportunity to accelerate this by selling some additional software, acceleration software. Anyway, so those are the main things. Now, in terms of the value capture, we did a brief scenario analysis here looking just at China Mobile. And in this case, well, we made some assumptions. These are 85,000 towers that were sold to China Mobile last year. Now, if we take that assumption, we assume only 50% of them were sold with, say, multi-hop, and we assume that there's a 10% pricing premium, and this is how much those towers were going for, that would result in about $300 million of sales in 2009. Now, it will take a few years before multi-hop technology can literally be rolled out and immediately deployed, but this gives you an idea about how much value would be added if you got a 10% price premium for it. Not perfect, but it gives you a reason to pay attention, hopefully. So, that being said, let's talk about a few of the risks. Now, we can't talk about all the risks in extreme detail, but we wanted to mitigate a few of them. First of all, the competitors do have a lead in the software area. We're able to resolve this first by the fact of our size and our customer intimacy. In the area of test markets, there's always the possibility of a test market failure, so we can diversify our test markets across potentially several industries. In the area of multi-hop and user adoption, both the users have an incentive to do this because of pricing, and the operators have a reason to overcome their resistance because of both competitive pressure and congestion that they're experiencing. So in the end of the day, what do we want you to remember about our presentation? We're proposing, one, a platform that's going to help your network operators acquire more customers, particularly ones in these machine-to-machine based businesses. And the second, a technology that is going to help resolve the congestion problem. So essentially, we're going to a solution that adds connections to the network and a solution that resolves the problems of congestion from those connections to the network. Two solutions and in that way they're tied together. So at that point, I'd like to turn it over for any questions that you might have. Fantastic.
First of all, thank you. A great presentation. And let's see, who wants to go first with a question?
You want to go? Okay. Thanks again for your presentation. My question is in relation to your solution 1. And I don't know if you want to go back to the slides or sure. I have the information here. But this is where you have the example of healthcare to senior citizens, and you picked the US market, and you picked Verizon for reasons that you outlined, and incentive for Verizon in this thing, and you also talked about partners for Ericsson here. So my question to you is, on one hand, I felt you were implying a business model direct relationship with these institutions, direct sales. On another hand, you spoke about Verizon and Verizon's relationship with Ericsson. So what do you envision to be the most lucrative business model for Ericsson in this space, direct sales or through the operator? And in either case, would Ericsson's value proposition change, and how would it change depending on the business model?
Sure. The way that we normally operate should be the way that we continue to operate, which is enabling our partners. So Verizon should engage their customers, which probably are some of these, could be a new company that's providing connected devices, or a big company like Johnson & Johnson that's getting into network connected devices, or perhaps the facility itself if it wants to come up with a solution. We propose this case as a way to test our platform with a partner. It's interesting that AT&T has sought one of these competitors. Actually, a press release came out this past week that AT&T has chosen Jasper Wireless to provide this solution. And as I mentioned before, Ericsson's providing the communication modules, except Jasper Wireless is providing the management tool. So Verizon may be in a key position here to partner with us. This is a copy of the press release. So leveraging Ericsson's next generation broadband modules in different categories, except access to AT&T Control Center, which is powered by Jasper Wireless. I think this gives us a big opportunity. But like I said, I think we should enable companies like Verizon to better serve their market, which will be the new machine-to-machine customers.
Okay, thank you.
Let me see if I understand. You're stating that really Ericsson is going to be supporting or enabling the operator in this case. Yet you mentioned platforms. Would it be better to simply identify a specific differentiator for an operator? So talking about Verizon or AT&T, would it be better to really focus and try to develop, as in this case, what appears to be a specific arrangement with AT&T to power AT&T's competitiveness versus a platform approach? And what do you see as the advantages or disadvantages for Ericsson?
Sure, there are a number of considerations here. One is, since we do business with so many different operators, we, in the end, would want to realize the economies of scale that come from rolling this out to all of our operators. By developing particular niche solutions for individual operators, we might not get those economies of scales. We also want to be careful of the relationships that we have with these different operators, and so we don't want to invite a situation where one of these operators becomes upset with us because of a new relationship we formed with another operator. So we need to be careful about that. I do like the idea as far as partnering with Verizon initially. Jeffrey Moore has this idea of crossing the chasm. We need a place to start. Clearly, we can't roll this out to 175 operators. And so as a beta test to prove the technology, partnering with a particular operator and making the solution workable for their particular network environment will prove the technology and then let us scale from there. So initially, I think we could do that, and then we'd want to scale.
Thank you. Just on congestion, you mentioned congestion as a key element here. Is that really the major issue, or is it more complex than that? Congestion in the sense that, yes, bandwidth is scarce, but is that the real business problem facing the operators and, in this case, the vendors like Ericsson?
Well, if you want to frame it in terms of their pain points are quality, customer acquisition, and turnover of their subscribers. So, of course, you probably want to do analysis as to whether or not this bandwidth and the shortage thereof has an impact. And there's a lot of negative press about AT&T, at least in the United States, related to their coverage, probably because the amount of bandwidth and congestion that crept up on their network and caught them unawares. That's a situation due to congestion. You can have some of that resolved by moving from, say, 3G to 4G, but if you're moving from, say, if you're having simultaneously two different multiplicative events going on, whereby one, you're moving from 5 to 50 billion devices, whereby the average throughput per user or per device is going up exponentially as well as people are doing more applications. You have literally two factors that are both growing at tremendous amounts and are multiplying together. I do believe that congestion is a critical problem, and it certainly is for some operators. At the very least, Multihop Technology is a tool that should certainly be in an operator's or in Ericsson's toolkit for places of high congestion as a way of resolving that.
But is technology the only way to address that congestion?
I think a second way to address it is one we mentioned earlier, which is through business models. I mentioned the idea of frequency. Usage of bandwidth is only one part of the problem. The more times a device is connecting to the network, the more times it's disruptive of that shared medium, and we learned this with shared Ethernet, and wireless has the same limitations. So if we can charge a premium for the number of connections, then that business model will enable us to extract some of the value and then upgrade our network or provide multi-hop or do whatever is necessary instead of being hit with this as a problem and a pain point.
Thank you.
One of the things that the case evidence talked a great deal about was the idea of optimization of software as being a good and rather significant impact on the amount of congestion that's going on. Unfortunately, we don't have control over all of the software developers, all of the makers of handsets, and all of the service providers. We don't have complete control over them, so we can't always ensure that all of those actors involved in the process are going to behave appropriately and fully optimize the applications that they have. So in an environment where we can't control all the actors to make sure that they're all doing the right optimum thing, you have left a few other tools that you have at your disposal. Building out your network is certainly one of them, and that's profitable for Ericsson. But in other cases, perhaps something like Multihop is another tool that should certainly be in their toolkit.
And a business model that penalizes them for the frequency of connection.
My question is pretty close to what was just discussed, the business model. And when you opened up the presentation, I was pretty excited with your analysis and the depthness of the need that is there in the market. Machine-to-machine platform is what you propose as one solution. And how I see is you're suggesting that we create an ecosystem where Ericsson is orchestrating that ecosystem to get the best value that's created in that ecosystem, right? And then as you proceeded further into your presentation, I kind of got lost because then you linked us to one of the operators. So what I was thinking during that process is that we have to make this upfront investment to create that platform and create the value. And then I got lost. Who's going to capture the value in this whole value chain? So do you have any further thoughts on that?
It would be a shared, one nice thing about the software as a service model is it reduces the risk for the operator. So they're going to pay us based on the connections that they serve through this model. So it's very little risk for them in terms of upfront cost, and therefore incentivizes them to use it to develop the connections, and then we get the ongoing revenue, of course. We price this pretty low in our estimates as far as value capture. Orange Business Services, which is a deliverer of part of France Telecom, is charging, they just announced recently, something like $6 to allow enterprises to manage their smartphones, to do things like remove unauthorized applications, turn off Bluetooth, or if the device is lost, to wipe it. So $6 a month. We're proposing to charge initially $1 a month, that the operators charge $1 a month, and in our model we used a value capture for Ericsson of 20% of that. The cost to provide this is fairly minimum. We looked at a solution similar to like an ERP installation at a large company, 10,000 function points, and computed the hours per function point, and it took like a fully burdened rate of $125 an hour, and that comes to something like $30 million to develop. I mean, on the extreme case, I just ran it with 50,000 function points, and it goes to $300 million. But if over this time, we have the ongoing revenue, so the return on investment is good for us. So we have good value capture, and as these devices come online, the operators will also be able to capture this value if they have a way to manage it. I think that we haven't seen the explosion yet. In the annual report from 2009, we see that things don't represent nearly any of the number of devices. That explosion is just now beginning, and I think it's because the operators didn't really have a way to manage it. And now, with press releases like this coming out about Jasper Wireless enabling someone like AT&T to deploy this, we're going to see rapid adoption. I feel like Ericsson's in a better position to serve these operators, collect part of that value, and help our operators collect value as this new ecosystem rolls out. Does that answer your question?
Okay, great. So you talked about the fee structure for the M2M business in your presentation. The case store also talked about the existing fee structure that are used for PCs, for smartphones. Did you have any discussions on whether it would be possible or not to change the fee structure for PCs and smartphones? And in that case, how that would be done and what it would be changed to?
So the tricky thing in this situation is as a typical economics prisoner's dilemma situation, whereby at this moment you have operators in a situation where they're now in flat rates. They used to be in more variable usage-based rates, particularly on voice. And it moved from that because eventually one of the operators cracked and started offering a flat rate. They grabbed a large acquisition of a lot of different customers, and then quickly the thing kind of spiraled from there. Unfortunately, due to antitrust reasons, the operators aren't allowed to collude to adjust their prices. The problem, of course, with this also is that any single operator, if they were to change their pricing to entirely usage-based, they quickly have a tremendous churn on a lot of their customer base. When that happens, we would expect that to be a strong deterrent for them changing the prices unless they're able to explore alternative methods. Now, for the software platform, we propose that pricing because a lot of devices, say a heat sensor, don't need to talk to the network very often, so we don't want to be charging something like $50 a month per device. So we want to keep that very, very low as an initial starting place for devices that are having very little activity. But we want it to scale up, certainly pretty rapidly, to things that are approaching the bandwidth of smartphones. And then hopefully, because these very low network utilization devices are not going to be impacting as much, that's pretty good revenue for each of those devices.
Rob, do you want to go?
I like the fact that you've laid out a something around the mission critical heart monitor. What's the practicality of being able to deliver that? I mean, have you thought through the ecosystem of how you will get that delivered? I mean, are there issues that you think will come about in trying to actually have that delivered into the market? And what happens when your age 65 or 70-year-old decides to travel outside of the U.S.? What happens? Does it work when they land somewhere else?
One reason that Jasper or that AT&T gave, or an advantage they have is, of course, they have a worldwide network. One of the key reasons that this platform is so important in deploying devices is, like in my analogy, that's one of those rowboats that just kind of rode out there and we don't know where it went. With this platform, you have notifications of location, failure to contact with a certain period of time, low battery conditions, tamper, if it's a security camera or something like that, or security device, tamper evidence so that, okay, we need to turn that thing off and not trust it. any of those notifications can be sent back to the monitoring company, and they can say, okay, we lost this, we now can't trust this data, or we need to contact this person, find out what the situation is. So that's exactly the reason that this platform is so important in deploying these devices, because they are all going to be out there, and we need to have a handle on them. Someone needs to have a handle on them. We envision Ericsson also being able to have some tower infrastructure that enables this and accelerates the process in a way that you can also offer more value to customers.
And I do get the idea of the platform and the idea of monitoring, but does Ericsson need to work with others? I mean, for example, you have roaming, and you know what roaming is today. So as you move, does Ericsson need to engage other players to figure out how to rethink the business model?
So there are definitely going to be cases exactly like you're saying that are essentially outside of something that, well, both that we have thought of and also outside of the scope of what might have been thought of for the test market. So if for a nurse in a nursing home case where if somebody left and went on vacation with a relative to Mexico or China or something like that, and they go outside of the U.S. and somebody forgot about the monitoring device, no doubt that doctor would be called to the hospital, and that would be a big problem because it appears their heart had stopped. That would be a big problem. Now, that being said, the resolution to that is doing test markets. So we can't expect that everything will be thought of in the first iteration. We expect that there will be some learning curve associated with it. And moreover, probably far more important, that we start that learning curve with the test case, like something like a nursing home, like something in a mission-critical type area, life-saving like role, better to resolve it so people trust it and trust the test case for perhaps definitely for less mission-critical type applications.
I think that Ericsson is well positioned here because you're doing some roaming billing, as I understand it, already, and this could be something that an Ericsson solution to a provider can offer. So Verizon can turn around and say to their new machine-to-machine business clients, hey, you get not only the ability to use our network, but you can roam, and that may be of important value to their customer. And it's something that Ericsson can easily do, to integrate with their current systems to do roaming billing, and Verizon can offer to their customers as a value.
Okay, one more question here. And you articulated very well at the beginning of the presentation two solutions that you're proposing. You've left me with the impression that you've done a lot of studies and zoomed in on these two. And you're addressing improving efficiency and reducing congestions, eliminating bottlenecks as one enabler for business growth, and the other one attacking, the kind of big bang type of application, machine to machine, towards 50 billion connections. What is your view of what happens in between? I mean, as you know, there's app stores there are lots of devices, lots of OSs. What role would the App Store play in Ericsson's evolving business model and Ericsson's end-to-end solutions?
10 years ago, we could not envision an app-centric world, and I think we would all agree. I think the cover of Business Week a couple of weeks ago just said apps in big letters on the front. We live in an app-centric world. That was enabled by Apple launching their App Store in kind of a bold move. In a similar model fashion, we envision this platform as being the enabler of the new connected device world. So, Ericsson has been talking about in 2020 this connected device world. How is that going to happen, as I've covered? We think that this platform is the enabler for the connected device world in the same way that it makes it easy for that world to be realized, just as the launch of that App Store enabled the app-centric world we live in today. And so I think it's a parallel structure. So we're not addressing app stores in particular, but we think that this platform is a similar structure to the App Store, and that it enables a whole new world that people wouldn't have envisioned otherwise.
And the key point, exactly as Tom was saying, is entrepreneurship. The App Store took off because something was created that was easy for developers to take off. We're talking about exactly the same thing, a platform for which anybody with a great idea for using a device that uses machine-to-machine technology, of which we've only thought of a few. I mean, Sumit probably could tell you a great example about taxis in Delhi. We looked at transportation. But again, those are the ones that we've thought of. Those are the known knowns in a sense, right? But there's a lot of unknown unknowns whereby in a distributed fashion, in the exact same way the Apple Store is, a lot of applications were created that certainly Apple did not originally envision. We want to create an environment where that is highly incentivized because we don't want to necessarily be originators of every solution in the machine-to-machine business. We stand to benefit from their entrepreneurship, and we want to create a platform for which that can happen.
So can you explain how the multi-hop would really solve congestion?
Sure, sure. Could you, thanks. Right. I'm going to take that off there for a second. The reason why multi-hop works better is because you have if you have a wireless spectrum that has a potential of, say, 50 megabytes a second, and you have one user on it, they'll get the 50 megabytes a second, particularly if they're close to the source. Now, on the other hand, if you add 2 users, you're not going to divide the spectrum evenly. The main point of this is just the engineering fact is you add additional users, regardless of how many channels you're talking about and how sophisticated the specifications, you're not going to linearly grow that. There's also a limited amount of spectrum. Now, the solution with multi-hop solves that problem by reducing the number of primary connections to a tower, and that increases the amount of backhaul because there's less interference with these particular connections up to the tower. Now, the reason why that helps everyone, and it helps on 2 levels. One is increasing the total amount of bandwidth to the backhaul, but also what it also does is improve the battery life. Now, this occurs, the battery life is improved, and the throughput is improved through the same mechanism. In a distributed way, assuming that you're using the right kind of algorithm, a distributed rate, power allocation specification for these handsets, devices, and tower would enable this guy, who's only communicating with something that's 10 or 30 feet away, to reduce the power of the radio. As a result, he's not transmitting as far. He's not interfering with the guy up here. He's not interfering with the guy over here because he's not communicating as far. Now, if you have things standing in your way between the tower, that's going to create interference, and thereby the radio in a cell phone will automatically increase to reach the distance it needs to go. So if you're able to adjust that power level, you're only communicating at a minimum power level to something nearby, and then that's communicating ideally in a direct line of sight to something else that's nearby, and then this thing communicates highly efficiently back with the tower. So that's the main reason why there's an advantage. Of course, there's lots of R&D that's involved in that area, and part of the reason I proposed it is I happen to know somebody who recently invented something along these lines. So it makes it somewhat a little bit easier. Now, I know his technology works, but he's only one person. There's probably at many different universities around the world, people are working on this because of how valuable the intellectual property to the solution happens to be. So while he's only one person, I know one person who has a certain amount of intellectual property. I haven't seen everything in the world. I assume there's many others that can either be acquired, purchased, licensed. Given the number of people working on the problem, I see this as a solvable problem for Ericsson.
Thanks.
Appstore. I want to come back to the Appstore for a moment. Ericsson has already announced it's doing an e-store. Do you agree with that? Do you see what the strength is, and what's the differentiation for them from the multitude of app stores that are already there, including the Apple App Store?
I have to admit that is not an area that we focused on in terms of our strategy. One way that Ericsson could use its App Store is as people enter the platform environment, as I mentioned earlier, with new, especially consumer-centric devices. For example, Seva is a company that has picture frames that connect right now via telephone line modems, but it's not very practical in this age where you can move things around the house. Where are your phone lines? They could sell those through, instead of an application store, they could sell it through an actual store. It's a physical object, but it's a connected object. And that could be something that, as part of this platform, you get access to, if you're a consumer-centric product, you could get access to a store that allows you to face customers and sell to customers. And that would be very differentiated, of course, from the application store that Apple has. I don't I wouldn't say out-appling at Apple's game is worth it, whereas we have an advantage here if we can build on our...
All right, let me change direction for a moment. Let's go to practical level. You mentioned the heart monitor situation. Give me an idea what the price would be for that for the user. Let me just pick a number.
Well, we know the cost, that we're charging would be, let's say,
$1.
the $12 per year.
Right, but now go to the cost of the unit. So the actual, whether you're implanting it or whatever you're doing, what would be the relative cost? Doesn't matter, just give me a number.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's just say $200. I don't know the implantation
It's
or...
okay, so $200, and then you've got what seems to be a reasonable fee, $12. Now.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Now, when I land here, I get a message from O2. It's kind of like a user warning. It tells me, by the way, that if I am, this, by the way, uses a lot of signaling, and it tells me automatically that I'm going to be charged probably £1 per megabyte being used. And that's in roaming. So every time I'm doing something here, I'm clicking things, and by the way, some people have gotten some significant bills, and I hear about them. The question for you is the practicality of what you're proposing, because what you're looking at is you've got a piece, you've got the monitor itself, assuming you can get that made, you've got a fee which you're going to charge, which is being made by Ericsson, but there's other parts of the value chain that you've got to look at and understand. How are you going to address those to make this a practical solution?
One nice thing about the platform is that we know when the device is in a place where it's going to cost extra money. We might be able to contact or text message the person who is receiving monitoring updates to say, this is the situation. The other, a way around that is Ericsson engaging in, Ericsson already has mobile virtual network operations, and they could provide through those mobile virtual network operations the appearance of local connectivity in other places, because Ericsson has this large footprint around the globe. And that's where I was saying, building that kind of ability into other carriers' handsets, you could collect the fees and then pass them on to the appropriate parties in the value chain. And so you could be a really valuable player, a central player in the ecosystem there.
Andrea?
Right, thank you very much.